Well, good morning, Southern Oregon. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John L. Scott Real Estate and your host of the show. Today, we're going to be interviewing Justin Gindlesperger, the flood administrator from Central Point. And this is going to be a really, really interesting interview. We're going to talk about the waterways that we have in Southern Oregon. We're going to talk about how that affects homeowners' real estate and also what you can do if you find that your property is in a flood area. It's going to be great. There's a lot of science behind flood administration, and Justin will be joining us shortly to talk about all that. In the meantime, let's jump onto our local statistics. We're going to talk about all three counties, and we're going to start with Jackson County first. Jackson County prices year over year are down 9%. The average single family home now costing $498,222 as of this week. The number of solds year over year in Jackson County are up 19%. We had 43 closings in the residential market this week on MLS. Number of listings year over year in Jackson County are down 5%. We have 556 active residential listings on SOMLS in Jackson County this week. The Josephine County prices year over year are down 33%. The average single family home in Josephine County this week costing $456,679. The number of sales year over year are up in Josephine County 133%. We have 14 closings in Josephine County this week in the residential market. Number of listings year over year are down 2% in Josephine County. There's 261 active listings on SLMLS. Klamath County prices year over year are up 12%. The average single family home in Klamath County now costing $266,500. Number of solds in Klamath County year over year this week are up 33%. We had 8 closings in Klamath County this week. The number of listings year over year in Klamath County are down 12%. There are 198 active listings on SOMLS in Klamath County this week. So folks, you can see that the market is starting to stabilize a little bit, but we still have a shortage of listings. We have more listings now for the most part than we did this time last year. It changes week to week, but that's why we track it week to week. So if you're thinking of selling your home, it's still a great time before the spring rush. And if you're buying, the prices are still in a good place, and we expect them to rise if the interest rates go down. I should say when the interest rates go down. We just don't know when that's going to be. So get out there and write your offers if you're in the market and you're pre-approved already, or if you wait, you just got to be prepared for a little bit of a price change as the interest rates change, because that affects people's ability to buy. And there may be more multi-offer situations coming, fighting over listings if the interest rates go down. So let's get ready to have Justin come into the studio and talk to us about flood administration. Well, thank you, Justin, for coming on the show today. We're really excited to hear about flood administration and the history of that in Central Point.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So for those who don't quite understand just the sheer amount of water that we have here, can we put this in a little bit of a historical context?
Sure. I mean, as far as the specific amounts of water, I mean, I don't.
Well, a lot of the residents don't realize how much water we have here, and some people don't even know that we have flood administration.
Sure,
people
do. So I'm in Central Point, specific to Central Point, and so we have 7 creeks with mapped floodplains within the city itself. So the biggest is Bear Creek, and obviously that runs from through a large portion of the Rogue Valley, and it connects with the Rogue River just upstream from, or downstream, excuse me, from Central Point. But we do have some other creeks, and they flow in from the county. And I don't think a lot of people realize the flooding risks that are here. And so anytime there's moving water, there is a risk of flooding. And so with today's weather, I mean, it's going to be pretty warm. So we're going to get a lot of snow melt to run off. Our creeks are already full, with the moisture and the precipitation that we've had over the weekend. Groundwater levels are up, and so you start to put more water in the system, and it's a prime time for flooding. And so in the valley, our flood season generally runs from October to April. So this is a pretty timely conversation to be having here. And so I think most of the communities within Jackson County and the Rogue Valley have a floodplain administrator. I know Jackson County does, City of Medford does, Central Point does, even up to like Grants Pass. So, I mean, it's a recognized need, a recognized program, and floodplain administration for a city or for a community is really just acting as a go-between between FEMA and the property owners. And so,
Oh, gotcha.
yeah, so a lot of the regulations, actually all of the floodplain regulations, come from FEMA. I mean, it started, and there was major flooding, I think back in the 70s, like Hurricane Agnes or something like that on the East Coast, really before flood insurance got started. And that's what this whole program is, the National Flood Insurance Program, right? It's all about having the ability to insure structures. And FEMA's about the only game in town as far as buying flood insurance. And so the insurance program is really kind of some carrots and sticks. And so they provide some base flood regulations for communities to administer. And then by doing that, then they make flood insurance available. And so the flood regulations really are just an attempt to lower risk, so elevating structures, putting flood vents in, things like that. So recognizing that it is a hazard, that it is a risk, and then how do you mitigate that or reduce the risk for property owners, because paying out insurance is pretty costly. You get a couple of disasters, Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast, Hurricane Katrina was a huge one, and so it kind of sets the whole program on its head.
That's interesting. I think a lot of people don't realize that these are federal guidelines, and they can change. What are some of the mitigations, or what are some of the things that a homeowner might do to their yard or their house to help it be a little bit more flood safe?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is elevating the structure. And I don't have all of the statistics here in front of me, but FEMA studies all this stuff. They've got the actuarial tables to look at all this stuff and to what the risk reduction is for some of the floodproofing requirements. And the biggest one is elevating. So you put the main floor of the structure above the mapped water surface elevation of the flood. And that's expected, right? So it's if something changes in the hydrology of the stream, for example, you get some trees down, or somebody's car goes in a culvert and the water diverts around.
Oh, right.
Change those flood regimes a little bit, but it's kind of best science. It's a snapshot in time, how much water's coming and where that water's going to go. So you get an elevation certificate, and so what that is you hire a surveyor to come out to your property, and they essentially kind of map points on your property. And so they tell you what the elevation of your property is, what the water surface elevation is expected to be and this is all based on the 1% annual chance flood. They used to call it the 100-year flood, but then it was kind of confusing for property owners, because they would say, well, when's the next 100-year flood? Or when was the and it's really just, it's a 1% annual risk. So if we have it this year, we still have the same risk of it next year as well.
Okay. So that's a good education point.
Yeah, certainly. And so, and we can get to the insurance aspect in a little bit. So if you're outside of that, that 100-year or 1% annual chance flood, then there's no purchase requirement on there. So that's kind of where that comes from too. So that gets a little confusing for folks. So you get an elevation certificate, and you figure out where the water surface elevation is and where your main floor is. And that's really what it's based on, is a main floor. Unless you have a crawl space that's more than 4 feet deep, then FEMA will consider that a basement.
Oh, okay.
And so that your risk really starts to go up if you have living space below the base flood elevation.
Mm-hmm.
So you can elevate some minor things if you do have a crawl space. Even if your main floor is below the water surface elevation, but you have a crawl space, you could put flood vents in, because the hydrostatic pressure from the floodwaters could push on your foundation walls and cause damage, or potentially collapse if the water's flowing fast enough.
So what is a flood vent?
Yes,
What does that
it's
mean?
basically just an opening in a wall that allows free flow of the water to move through. And so you won't get an insurance benefit on if it's something that you have to go out and physically do. It has to be automatic. So a lot of foundation vents will count for that. And to meet FEMA standards, you need 1 square inch for every square foot of enclosed floor area. So if you have 1,000 square foot floor area on your house, you need to have 1,000 square inches
A flood,
of flood vent area
a
of
flood vent.
yeah. And so a lot of times it takes a lot of vents. And if you're just using foundation vents, what a lot of folks do is they kind of have them the whole way around the perimeter. FEMA just requires on adjacent walls, so they would share a corner. That way that the water can just kind of flow through the foundation unimpeded, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go all the way up to hydraulic or engineered vents that have little floats in them, and they automatically pop open and flow through.
Well, we're talking to Justin Gindlesperger from City of Central Point. We got to take a quick break. Do not touch that dial. We've got more interesting information from Justin. Well, hey, Southern Oregon, welcome back to the Real Estate Show. Today, we have a real treat in store. We have Justin Gindlesperger from the City of Central Point talking about water flood administration. And right before the break, we were talking about vents and how big they had to be in order to qualify to pass through water if there were a flood.
Yeah, so again, it's 1 square inch for every square foot of floor area, and it's the main floor. And that's basically the box of your house. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you have 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet, whatever it is, you need to match that in square inches of
Mm-hmm.
vent area. And just before the break, we were talking about types of vents that would qualify. Some foundation vents do, but the smaller the opening, the quicker that they kind of clog, because a lot of things other than just water come down through.
Right.
And then there are companies that manufacture kind of automatic type vents that are solid to keep out, debris or critters or things in times when it's not flooding. And then they have a float in there, so as the water comes up along there, it triggers and the water can flow through unimpeded.
So it opens up by itself.
It does, yeah. And they actually
Wow.
that you could put them in garage doors and things like that. So when you're opening and closing your garage door every day, an everyday occurrence, it doesn't flip open and cause problems. But then in time of flood, it'll come and flip that vent open and let the water flow through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's parts of Central Point that you wouldn't expect to be in a flood zone, but they are. How does that get determined?
So all the mapping comes through FEMA. They do all of our floodplain maps. And so really it's just a calculation of the amount of water that would come through, and then doing a survey to determine what the elevations were and where exactly that water would go. It's a pretty basic explanation of it. There's quite a bit of science that goes into it, with flow dynamics and hydraulics and hydrodynamics and all of that stuff. And so really what that does is it just gives you kind of a picture of where that water would come through the city. And the maps are a best science, and they can't survey every property, right? And so they do have a process that if you come in and you say, hey, you know, my property I think is higher than what this water surface elevation is, there is a process for you to use to get out of that. It's called a letter of map amendment. And so you need an elevation certificate, which we had talked about earlier. So you get a surveyor to come out, get your property elevations, and then some elevations of specific features of either your property or your house. So what you're looking at for your house is lowest adjacent grade, highest adjacent grade, the main floor elevation, and then generally your mechanical equipment like your HVAC and things like that.
What does
Uh,
that have to do with it? The mechanical equipment?
so that's it's insurable, or yeah, that would be a claim. So if that's
Oh, okay, okay.
elevation, that would create damage, right? And so if you're a homeowner with flood insurance, then you could put that in. So
Hmm.
that's below water surface elevation, that's identified as a risk.
Do you ever have homeowners put their mechanicals up higher?
Yeah, so new construction, they do have to elevate their
Oh, really?
yeah. And so that's one option for folks if they find themselves in a mapped flood area, and they didn't build before flood insurance was required or the known flood risk was mapped. If they want to retrofit, that's one thing that they could do to help save some cost on insurance, is elevate that mechanical equipment.
Okay. Um, so when homeowners come and talk to you about this process, what is the most common thing they ask?
Am I in the floodplain is the
Mm,
first one. You know, here's my address. Am I in there?
hmm.
Central Point, you know, pretty much everything east of I-5 is not mapped in a floodplain.
Oh, okay.
And most of our flooding is actually on the west side of the city. So we look at that, and then they want to know if they have an elevation certificate, because you need one of those if you're going to purchase flood insurance.
Well, is that something you guys would keep on file?
So we have, I think it's a pretty complete record of all structures, all residences within a mapped floodplain. My predecessor got a grant, a hazard mitigation grant, and then the city hired a surveyor and went out and then filled out elevation certificates for all existing structures that were in the.
That's awesome. I did not know that.
Yep, and that's all available on our website as well. So then as we go forward, any new structure that's built in the floodplain, obviously that's a requirement, so that we know that they're meeting FEMA standards essentially.
Hmm. Hmm. And there's a lot of new construction going on. So let's talk about what's different now if you're doing something brand new.
Yeah, so you do have to meet some elevation requirements. So you have to have your first floor above base flood elevation. You have to have your mechanical equipment above base flood elevation. You need those flood vents that we had talked about previously.
So the flood vents are required now for new
They are
construction in
Yep.
Central Point?
Yep. Yeah, if you're elevating your building on a crawl space on a foundation wall,
Hmm.
flood vents are required. If you're elevating on fill, you don't necessarily need the flood vents. There's some other requirements. We generally don't see a lot of things elevated on fill, just based on the way things are constructed and graded here in the city.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow, that is so interesting. So, and you were saying that the new construction, the HVAC units are up higher. So you've got flood vents. Anything else? Are there any restrictions about what you can put in your yard?
Generally not. I mean, if you're closer to a stream, there may be some requirements on or restrictions on your fence. So if you're within what's called the floodway, which is really the high hazard area of
Hmm.
plane. So if you've ever watched a stream, and this is the explanation that I use with a lot of folks. If you ever watched a creek or a stream flood, you know, it comes up out of the banks, and the area closest to the channel, it's moving a lot faster, and the rest of it is just kind of backwatery. You know, it's a little bit of velocity, but it rises a little bit slower. It doesn't move quite as fast. So those outer edges are, you know, the flood fringe, we'll say. But then the middle areas where it's flowing faster is a higher hazard area. It's called the floodway. So we don't allow any new construction in the floodway. If you're doing, like, even when the city does a culvert replacement or a bridge replacement, we need to do some engineering studies, hydraulic analysis, and things like that to make sure that we're not either impeding flow or increasing water surface elevation during flood, things like that, to make sure that it's safe, all fills compacted and things like that.
Wow, that's a lot of science.
It is. They're pretty interesting to look at and to read to kind of see where it all goes. And a lot of times the engineers have to recreate an older study and then start running it through newer software to make sure everything's matching up and correcting errors and things like that. Um,
Wow.
so if you put your science hat or your engineer hat on, it can be pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have properties that are located along the stream banks or the creeks. It was a pretty desirable place to build and to live before people really knew what those risks were. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
starting to put obstructions in there, that could create problems for people upstream of you and also downstream. Then it could create debris in the flow waters. So then that could cause a problem because then if that gets stuck or starts to build up somewhere, the water could release and create flooding that's not expected. So folks that are outside that don't have flood insurance may wind up experiencing flooding, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And were you here in 97? That was not considered a big flood, but we learned a lot by watching how the creeks got kind of clogged up with debris.
Yeah, no, I was not in the valley in 97. Um, but we do have, so Central Point does have mapping that shows where that historical flood
Oh,
happened.
does it?
Yeah. So up towards scenic, some undersized culverts and some debris and I think the blackberries may have contributed to that.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
it kind of created a backwater, and then flooded some of our neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. And so now we're fast forwarding this many years past. It seems like a lot has been done to the watersheds and bridges and things like that. Has Central Point any future kinds of work they still want to do, or are you pretty much done?
No, I mean, we still have some mitigation ideas, through our stormwater management planning, hazard mitigation planning. We identify where our risks are at, and then, where can we keep working to reduce those risks. So recently, the city started working on a culvert replacement or a bridge replacement on West Pine Street, uh,
Oh,
where Griffin Creek flows through. So that should
uh-huh.
alleviate some of the flood risks in that area for those folks. Yeah.
We're going to have to take a quick break. We're talking to Justin Gindlesperger from City of Central Point, talking about flood administration, and just water in Southern Oregon in general. This episode is going to be repeated tomorrow, Sunday, at 8 a.m. on the ACE, our new radio station home, 1300 a.m. So don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with more interesting conversation with Justin. Well, hey, everybody. We're talking to Justin Gindlesperger. I'm sorry, your name, with the city of Central Point, talking about floodwaters, mitigation, and just how much water we have in Southern Oregon. People love that about our region, but they don't quite always understand. So thank you for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure.
So right before the break, we were talking about some mitigation ideas that you guys might have for the future. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So just, I guess, maybe backing up just a little bit, one thing that the city does consistently in the summers, is we do a stream walk. It's less of a walk, and we're doing a little bit more aerial oversight, with some drone activity.
Oh,
There's
that's super cool.
some areas where we can't get in, where places
Yeah.
where the property line goes completely to the center of the stream and things like that. But what we're looking for is overgrown vegetation, obstructions. We've actually found a little picnic spot and a hammock over the creek one time. So
Oh,
um,
because people, yeah.
we've actually seen some beaver activity in the city,
Really? In the city of Central Point?
within the city limits. Yep.
Wow.
So we get some wildlife interactions there as well, just to make sure that our culverts are clear, and then we do it in the summer because that's a low flow time, and then
Mm-hmm.
um, this time of the year when we have high floods, that we're not washing things away, that people may think, oh, that's not close to the water, that should be fine, whether it's a lawn chair or, a little patio or whatever.
Swing set.
Certainly, yeah. Things that could go in and then block up a culvert, and then, you get branches and things like that come through. Hazard trees, we identify those and work with property owners to get those removed. So that's a large part of what we do as far as maintenance. And then our public works crews, they're always looking at some of our drainage basins and detention basins to make sure that those things are holding back the water like they're supposed to, and the discharge structures are clean, so that we don't have problems at the time, when it's raining and, everybody expects things to work, the worst possible times, things like.
What is a detention? You say basin?
Yes, basin. It's kind of just like a pond. A lot of times they'll sit empty throughout the year. You won't see anything in them, just like a empty grass basin. And then when you get a lot of stormwater runoff from commercial areas or impervious areas, roads, things like that, throughout the neighborhood, then it'll drain into a central location, and it'll hold it back at a measured rate, so that hopefully the idea is that it'll infiltrate into the ground, or once it gets to a certain point, that it'll release through some kind of outlet structure at a measured rate, so that it's not just blowing through an area and creating, like an urban type flood somewhere downstream.
So that's interesting. You're purposely managing the way it's going into the ground.
Yeah. And so now we're
Trying to slow it down a little bit
from floodplain administration into like public works and site engineering, but it's all interrelated. Yeah.
And so what happens to the city sewer system during a flood?
That's a good question. I mean, there is a risk of flooding through the sewer system, and so that's why they tell you don't go into floodwaters. Because you never know what's in there. It's not just lake and river water that's coming down there.
Gotcha.
There could be sewage, things like that. So
It
yeah,
probably is.
yeah. I mean, a lot of times those will back up, and then it'll flow out either through manholes or some other backup into people's basements, things like that.
So one of the things people love about Southern Oregon is the Rogue River, and we do have people come from all over the world to live on the Rogue River. So what are some of the precautions for that kind of a lifestyle that people might not realize?
Certainly. I mean, if you're buying property along the river, I mean, you need to be very aware of what the water surface elevation is. If the house was constructed prior to floodplain mapping,
which a lot of them were.
Yeah, certainly. Your insurance rates are going to start to go up. The grandfathering, quote unquote, grandfathering is starting to go away. And so FEMA is switching people to more actuarial rates.
Oh.
And so that's actually changing. It's not just folks within the floodplain or outside the floodplain. That's really the metric for the required purchase. So if you have a federally backed mortgage and you're in a mapped flood zone, 100-year, 1% annual chance flood, you're either your lender or your insurance company, somebody's going to require flood insurance. So mandatory purchase. So if you're outside of that, there is no mandatory purchase, but you can still buy flood insurance.
And it's highly recommended, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, there's actually, FEMA publishes all these statistics, and a large portion of flood insurance claims are actually outside of mapped.
Really?
Maybe I shouldn't say large portion, but there is a higher percentage than what you would think.
Wow.
And so if you're in an area that may flood, and there's all types of floods. There's urban floods, and lakes can flood. If we were on the coast, there's coastal flooding. And so they're changing the risk rating. They actually call it risk rating 2.0, and so they take into a larger consideration more factors other than just where you're at and how high your house is. So it's where you're at. How low is the area that you're in relative to all the other areas? So, is water going to kind of collect down where you are? Is it going to be harder to discharge? What type of construction is your house? Is it brick? Is it wood framed? How high? Uh, you know, there's a whole mix of variables that go in together. The old system, I could pretty closely estimate what people's flood insurance rate would be, just based on the actuarial tables, how high they were, where they were located, and things like that. This whole new system, I haven't been able to really pinpoint or figure it out. So if
Well,
somebody
this is so interesting is you're starting to get into the realm of technologically analyzing. So analytics are coming into play, I bet, with a
yes,
lot of this.
yep, a lot. So, yeah, so I mean, so we can go back to talk about the Rogue River, so
Yes, sorry.
yeah, no, there's so many different things that go on in floodplain administration. So when you start talking about one thing, it really starts to take you down a path.
Yeah, it really does. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I mean, so being along the Rogue River, so they'd have to check out when the house was built. Is there flood insurance? Is it available? How much flood insurance? What type of appurtenances do they have? Like, can they have a dock? Can they not have a dock? Is it have to be removed at certain times?
Really interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's beautiful. If you have property along the Rogue River, it's a great place to be, especially in the summer when it's hot. You can get down close to the river and things like that. But I guess just going into it with their eyes wide open is a big thing.
So the way water behaves in a flood is somewhat surprising to people. Is it doesn't just jump over the banks, it's also seeping up from the ground.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that spreading out of the water damage that people might not quite understand?
Yeah, certainly. So like you said, it doesn't just come straight up out of the creek and then go across the surface of the land. There is an interaction between groundwater and the creeks and the streams, and so you get water kind of moving underground, so to speak. So folks out in the county that may be listening to this, if you're in a flood zone and you have a septic tank,
Right.
there is a case where water could come in and actually push that tank and kind of float it up out. So,
Wow.
or underground structures, or if they have I don't know, propane tank or something underground, a lot of times they either have to be weighted or anchored so that they don't become buoyant and actually
Really?
float. Yeah, it's more
Wow.
common for tanks that are above ground to push up and float and go
How do
downstream.
you anchor something though? How do you anchor something that's in the earth?
Um, uh, so for septic tanks, it's really kind of just like putting an extra heavy lid on it.
Oh, okay, okay.
So just making sure that it's, sufficiently weighted, and, engineers do all those calculations.
Yeah, yeah. Just the image in my head, I just couldn't figure
Yeah.
out. What do you tie it to? And we do have so many rural properties, and Central Point has quite a few. In just a few seconds before we go to our next break, um, do you have any other rural property tips for flood preparation?
I mean, it's really just keeping the area around the creek or the stream or the river clear of obstruction, as clear as you can. Native vegetation is generally okay. Limit the number of fences or small structures, even things that don't need a permit. Um,
That's good advice.
yeah, certainly. I mean, because it
Yeah.
may cause a problem for you, but it could cause problems for folks upstream or downstream.
We should talk about animals too, because we have a lot of that in Southern Oregon. We're gonna have to take a quick break. We're talking to Justin Gindlesperger from the city of Central Point, talking about water, flooding, and hazards. We'll be right back with a quick word from our sponsors. Don't go away. Well, hey, Southern Oregon, welcome back to the Real Estate Show. So glad you could join us today. We're talking to Justin Gindlesperger from the city of Central Point. We're talking about flood. This is the season. It's so good we could have you on the show today, Justin.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to be here.
And right before the break, we were talking a little bit about our rural property owners. Are there any rules about animals if you're in the rural district, flooding? Any common sense tips you want to give people?
No, generally not. I mean, the types of fences that folks use in rural areas to keep animals in are generally okay in the floodplain. We had talked a little bit about the floodway.
Mm-hmm.
And those types of fences, are okay because they're open. They'll generally just kind of fold down if the water comes by and generally not cause a problem. But I think what you said is just common sense. Kind of watching the weather, watching the streams. Keeping your animals close because it doesn't take much water to start causing either undercutting of a bank where animals typically,
Oh, yeah.
or maybe a swift current, kind of picking up an animal and kind of taking it downstream on an unexpected journey maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's got to be setback rules and things for barns and outbuildings.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
the rural areas are generally under county restrictions. So if somebody listening to this is in a rural area, I would start with Jackson County first,
Mm-hmm.
talk to their floodplain administrator. Um,
Mm-hmm.
But, as I said, for Central Point, no structures in the floodway, and that's generally accepted throughout the Rogue Valley, through all communities. So, you wouldn't be able to have a new structure right in a floodway. So probably not right along the stream or the stream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of people coming from other places, and they're used to having a lot of docks and boat houses and things, and we just don't let people do that on our waterways, do we?
Generally not. I mean, there's water dependent uses, so they may get a dock, maybe a temporary kind of structure. Um, we here in Central Point, we generally don't allow things across our creeks, because you're going to have to go through a hydraulic analysis, to make
What's
sure.
that?
So that's the engineering study where you're calculating the flows and
The water flow?
yes. Yep. To make sure that you're not creating an obstruction or constricting flows that's going to create a backwater or create flooding somewhere else.
Wow, that's interesting. So you're actually trying to model and find out how the water is going to react to this item you're putting near the bank or in the water.
Right. Right.
Wow, that's super cool. You got to be a real brainiac to work over there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's generally through a licensed engineer.
Uh-huh.
So these studies can get heavily involved. Yeah.
Well, they're very interesting, and Oregon does a good job of taking care of its waterways.
It certainly does. Yep.
Yeah. And I know that it annoys people, but it's for a good reason.
Right. Right.
So going back to Central Point, you mentioned urban flooding. What is that?
That's really like if a culvert or an inlet, something within city limits, right in the neighborhood by your house backs up, or we get, kind of a gully washer, a thunderstorm or something, some really heavy rains, and it goes above and beyond what the the storm system can handle, and then it just creates a backwater, and then it can flood streets, sidewalks, and then come up into people's properties and potentially flood their homes.
But the city has been so careful and thoughtful about a lot of the mechanics of this. It would be surprising, wouldn't it? That if
Yes,
you would
and
have
so
urban
with
flooding.
our stormwater program, our public works program, our department has mapped a lot of those problem spots, and so we prioritize those and do some mitigation, some retrofitting, to prevent those problems in the future. So once we know there's a problem area, if the culvert's undersized or if there's a lot of debris coming, things like that, our public works guys are pretty quick to get out there and see what they can do to help prevent that in the future. And then if it's a large term fix, um, or a capital improvement type fix, we put that on the list, and then it works into the budget. And so as we work through our process in the future, we can upgrade and update and prevent that type of flooding.
So we have a pretty big population increase, it seems, over the years in Southern Oregon. How does that affect the flood planning?
Um, So it generally doesn't, but that's more stormwater management. And so
Mm-hmm.
the stormwater guys are monitoring that. And then they have a manual where folks, when they come in, they have to, depending on how big the development is, they have to capture some water. So we had talked about detention basins before. So that's a big one. Low impact type developments where you're putting water into, kind of um, like a, almost like a wetland type thing off your parking lot. So
Oh,
it,
yeah, yeah, you see a lot of those.
yeah, so it not only captures water, but then it can capture sediments and pollution and things like that before it charges into the groundwater or hits the storm system, which then ultimately leads to the streams, which then lead to the Rogue River.
Interesting. So a lot of people think those are for beautification, but that's actually to help clean the water and focus it.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
And they
Well,
look nice too, right? So it's, you add some landscaping around your hardscape.
yeah, they do. They really do. But it's again, it's just so interesting the amount of science that's underneath all this. And speaking of science, people can get a pretty good education from your website. It's really robust.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'll take credit for that. A lot of that work came from some of my predecessors, but um so yeah, if folks want more information specific to Central Point, our website is pretty easy. It's centralpointoregon.gov. That's GOV. And then on the right-hand side, there's a little tab for flood info. And so anybody that's in the city that needs an elevation certificate, they're all there. We have a link to our hazard mitigation plan, which we're in the process of updating currently. So that includes things beyond floods. So that's wildfire and some severe weather and drought, things like that. Yeah, and so there's links to some FEMA web pages. I think my contact information is on there. So yeah, a lot of good information.
And you're very accessible. As many of the folks that work for the city of Central Point, you can pick up the phone and they will call you back. That's not the way it is everywhere.
Yeah,
Um,
we pride ourselves in trying to get folks in the information that they need in a timely manner, because I know it's important to them.
yes, and we do want our citizens to be educated on this topic. We have an awful lot of water in Southern Oregon.
We do, and it's a pretty complex topic. As our conversation kind of, bobbed and weaved along, as we got talking about one thing, it's, oh, then, we have the insurance aspect, oh, we have the science aspect. So it can be pretty daunting, pretty confusing. So if folks, I think as long as they have awareness and they know that they can ask questions and they can find those answers, they may not, know what answers they're necessarily looking for, but finding out if they're in the flood zone and then what they can do from that point.
Mhm. Well, and I just love that the city of Central Point did all those elevation certificates, the individual properties, so that people can go to the city and see if they're in the floodplain by talking to you.
Yes, yep, absolutely.
Great investment. So if somebody wanted to come in and talk to you in person, what does that process look like?
So we don't need to do appointments here at the city of Central
You
Point.
don't need an appointment.
You don't need an appointment. Maybe I should be careful how to.
They're all going to come at once.
So City Hall is open every day or the planning department where I'm at is open every day from 8 to 12 and 1 to 4. No appointment necessary. So they can come in. We have floodplain maps available for them, and we can talk them through the process.
Mm-hmm. And if you're building new construction, it's a good place to start by talking to you, I bet.
It is, and the nice thing about Central Point is we are pretty small as far as staff goes. So the building and planning are right here together. So when you talk to us about not only floodplain requirements, but the planning requirements as far as setbacks and things like that, then you can go right on the other side of the counter and talk to our building official about
That's so awesome.
yeah what you need to submit to get that going as well.
We love our small town, but we're big on science. I did not realize how much science was involved. So thank you, Justin. We'd love to have you back on another time. Would you be willing to come back on and update us maybe later in the year?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. And just a reminder, this broadcast will be repeated tomorrow on AM 1300, the ACE, and it'll be on at 8 o'clock. So you can hear more of Justin's good advice.
All right. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks, everybody. We want to say also thank you to John L. Scott, Ashland and Medford, Guy Giles Mutual of Mortgage, and our local Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. Have a beautiful Southern Oregon weekend. Bye, folks.